name is Stephanie Mehta. I am the editor of Fast Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the HCL Pavilion for what I hope is going to be a really exciting conversation about the role of the CEO in a conversation that I think everyone is having at their organizations, which is around innovation and disruption. So thank you all for being here. We'll have time at the end for a couple of questions from the room, but I want to get right into it with this amazing panel that we've assembled for you today. Our panelists are Vas Narasimhan, who is the CEO of Novartis, Jim Loree, who is the president and CEO of Stanley Black & Decker, Jennifer Morgan, co-CEO of SAP, and C. Vijayakumar, who is the CEO of HCL. So thanks to all of you for being here early on a Wednesday morning. I'm going to start with a speed round question for each of the panelists, and I'm just going to go down the row. And I want to ask each of you, on a scale from 1 to 10, how you would rank your company's preparedness for being disrupted, for disruption readiness. There's this term that is going around, how ready is your company to take advantage of disruptions in the market? So 1 being not at all ready, 10 being ready to jump in there and take advantage of disruption. How would you rank your companies? Vas, let's start with you.
6.5.
That's very precise. Jim?
7.
Jennifer?
9.1.
Wow.
7.234.
All right, I'm going to come back to all of those numbers in a minute. The title of this panel is CEO Disrupt Thyself, and since that's a play on Physician Heal Thyself, I'm going to start with the physician on the panel. Vas, how do you create a sense of urgency at a company like Novartis when a lot of the innovation that you do happens over a long lead time? Developing a drug isn't something that you can iterate on in, a 60-day cycle. So how at a company like Novartis do you create that sense of urgency that allows you to be disruption ready?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to start with why. Why do we do it? And to really instill that deep sense of purpose throughout the whole organization. I mean, in our world, we say we want to reimagine medicine. And if every one of our scientists can see the patient at the end of the journey, however long it is to find the medicine, I think that makes a big difference. I think more tactically, look, every one of these 10-year journeys is also a series of 6 to 9 month sprints where you're trying to either find a new drug target or solve a puzzle and trying to do it ahead of your competition. I think that can also create these mini senses of urgency. Probably the biggest thing we're doing in our company is a big cultural makeover. We say we want to become an inspired, curious, unbossed company, trying to motivate our employees, hopefully to be highly engaged to solve these problems. I'd say the most important element of that is curiosity. If people are really curious, they want to move fast and get to the next problem.
Jim, yours is a company that has taken advantage of a lot of disruption that has taken place in both American manufacturing, but also American retailing. Many of you in the room may know that Black & Decker has acquired Craftsman, which was a storied Sears brand. How do you think about being able to be opportunistic in this environment?
Well, we have a saying in our company, which is bold and agile, and yet at the same time thoughtful and disciplined. And I think that contrast, is we've been around 177 years. Okay, you don't exist that long and thrive for that long of a period if you don't have some cultural aspects that involve those types of factors. And so we think about disruption, in M&A. We think about it in technology. We think about it in business models. And I try to get people to think on different time scales. And I also like them to think about, worst case scenarios. Worst case scenario would be that one of our billion-dollar retail customers bought Craftsman and threw us out. So you paint the picture. What if that happened? That wouldn't be good. So, you kind of quantify that and paint that picture. And then at the same time, you go to the other side, which is, this could be really positive. Think about this. We could buy this brand. We could redesign all the products. We could unleash Craftsman. It's a historical brand, generational brand, an American brand. And it could really just raise the image of the brand and really address a whole new generation, which is exactly what we did. And it was amazing to me. We literally paid $900 million for what we like to say was 9 letters, because that's basically all we got with it, right? It's 3 people and 9 letters.
That's like the Instagram purchase by Facebook, right?
So when we got it, we had to figure out what to do. We redesigned 1,250 products in 15 months, took the best of all our products, value propositions around the world, and the team was so motivated by the purpose. Our purpose, we're also purpose-driven by us, and it's for those who make the world. So you think about the makers and the creators and then the brand, and it all just kind of resonated together. And the execution was fabulous. And if you go to Lowe's, the store is basically painted red now, and it's already running. It's going to be. We said it would be $1 billion in 10 years. It's going to be $1 billion in 4 years. That's how successful it's been.
Wow. I want to come back to the whole concept of worst case scenarios, because at Fast Company, we write a lot about the disruptors, and I don't think they ever think about worst case scenarios. So I want to come back to that as a concept for the more traditional businesses in the room. Jennifer, SAP has also done a lot of acquisitions,
yes.
Most notably Qualtrics and SuccessFactors. Those are 2 that come to mind immediately. What role have those companies, those entrepreneurial companies that SAP has acquired, played in creating a more disruptive mentality or a more sort of innovative mentality at SAP?
Yeah, so over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so of the almost 50-year history, not as long as yours, we've done over about $40 billion in acquisitions. And you mentioned a couple of the companies. And, when you have we had such a strong, successful culture who had engineered great products around ERP. And so when you bring new companies with different skills, different cultures into the mix, it's important not just to tell them what to do, but give them context as to what they can gain from working together and learning from others who are coming in, right, into the family. Because it's not about us and them, it's about creating almost a whole new DNA that has to come together. And so one of the things that's important, I think, is to give the context. So to help, for example, the folks that are coming in who are new to the SAP family understand a little bit more about SAP and what we do, and make sure you're giving them the opportunity to see that, and vice versa. Context is very important, I believe, the why, to get people to buy in and want to understand how they can up their own game by learning from others. So that's been really critical, is giving that context and doing it through a variety of ways. There's formal and informal ways that you can do that. We've done a lot of cross-pollination, both early on, in the acquisitions, and then, over the couple years that have happened since each of these. And that's been really, really helpful, because you open people's minds, they think differently, and they start to then want to come together on their own versus leaders having to bring them together.
How much of that 9.1 number that you cited earlier do you think is attributable to this injection of entrepreneurial spirit that you get versus just the organic disruptive spirit inside
the majority? I think a lot of that has come from there, but I really think it has upped the game and gotten our own engineering organization, the folks who have been with SAP for many, many years, excited about thinking differently and being able to see how things are done differently, how they can be done faster. And that's been really helpful.
CVK, I eventually want to talk about disruption inside HCL, but I first want you to provide a little bit of oversight, because this company helps so many other companies with digital transformation. I would say the average number that I heard on stage was about a 7 in terms of disruptive readiness. How does that track with what you're seeing in the marketplace? Do you think that this group over-indexes on disruptive readiness?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Stephanie, Vas, Jim, and Jen, for joining us on this panel today. Thank you. The reason I gave a very precise answer was, as a CEO, you can never be prepared for the disruption. And as a CEO, you can't say that you're not prepared for the disruption, right? So you can't give you a right answer. Anyway, just scanning the industry and seeing lots of business leaders, I see there are a few common myths about disruption. I mean, sometimes it's thought of as like some big bang, noisy stuff which happens, which disrupts your business. which is a myth. It rarely happens that way. It's the slow change, which you don't even perceive, which over a period of time just engulfs a business or a business model, right? So that's one. Second is, most leaders think of disruption happening from one of your competitors. But usually it's, not always, but quite often it's industries which are not in the same business or someone who is coming with a completely different mindset, different business model. They come from a completely different angle. That's what happens. And the third is, a lot of leaders think of this as an external force. While I think a lot of times it's an external force, but there is a lot of merit in looking at internal factors driving disruption. I think if you can kind of cultivate the idea of democratized value creation in your organization, I think that's the most powerful base, because the real ideas come from the people who are working in the front end, right? Either in R&D or dealing with customers and things like that. So, and willingness to learn, right? Quite often you learn from your clients, or quite often you learn from several ecosystem stakeholders and partners. I think these are some of the common myths and some thinking around disruption that I see across the industry.
I do want to push you on the question of overall, when you look at the landscape of corporations, would you say companies are generally ready for disruption, or do you think that they're more on the 1 to 5 end of that scale?
I think companies, I would say, are less prepared for disruption, right? Like, look at what has happened in the retail industry. Everybody has been reactive to what's happening in the industry. I would say out of 10 companies, I think probably 3 of them are a little bit ahead and wanting to disrupt themselves before they're forced to do it. 7 of them are really reacting to external stimuli and whatever is happening from the external world, I would say.
Really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the role of the CEO in all of this, because as Vas and I were talking about earlier, the CEO is now expected to be the chief culture officer. The CEO is expected to be the chief fiduciary officer. The CEO sometimes is also the chairman. And so there are a lot of hats that the CEO has to wear, and also now having to be the chief disruption officer. Jim, you were a CFO before you became a CEO. You've held a lot of senior roles inside organizations. Now that you're in the CEO spot, how is the CEO uniquely qualified to drive disruption or lead the conversation around disruption?
Well, first of all, I think it's amazing when you finally go from even COO, which I was for a while, 7 years actually, to CEO. They tell you in these little seminars and CEO training schools, they tell you won't understand until you get there, and you're like, oh yeah, right. But I can corroborate that, because what's so interesting about the job is that you go, it's almost like ADD. You go from something like working with investors to working with the community to dealing with a crisis to figuring out how you're gonna do this quarter. And I mean, it's just in a given day, you might do like 20 different things, and your schedule is just nonstop. It's crazy. A lot of fun for me, and I enjoy it. But so when it comes to disruption, I think we're in a position in these jobs, these leadership jobs, to see it all, and to have the power and influence to shape the culture, to shape priorities, to determine the priorities, to hire the talent at the senior level, who then hires the talent below, and so on. And it's if you don't grab that responsibility and take it very seriously, I think would be making a big mistake.
Jennifer, you're the newest CEO on the panel. We're named co-CEO of SAP at the end of last year. And SAP has a very interesting model, a co-CEO model. How do you think about your place in disruption, and how do you divide those duties with your co-CEO, Christian Klein?
And by the way, thank you for saying that, because I just feel a lot better now. So Christian and I were appointed together as co-CEOs in October. We worked together for many years, which was great. I think from a co-CEO model, looking at it from two dimensions. You have to be, as partners, trust has to be the underpinning of everything. I mean, just a trust that cannot be broken. Egos cannot exist in that relationship. And so for us, that's the case, which is really great. So those are two big hurdles that you have to get over in any co-CEO model, which were never an issue for us, which is great. You have to be maniacally aligned and focused on the common vision for the company and communicating that together to the market, to your investors, to your employees, so that they see that there's that strong alignment, you have a common vision together, and when you're talking separately. That requires time. You have to spend a lot of time together to do that. Now, on the flip side, when it comes down to the execution and operationalizing that strategy, this is where you can get the benefits of dividing and conquering. And so the two of us have very different backgrounds. I have spent most of my career, prior to SAP, I was in consulting and then out in the field with our customers on the go-to-market side. And Christian's background, he was our global controller. He was our chief operating officer, really getting the company, ripe for disruption and moving the company forward. And so when you think about how we're dividing responsibilities, it aligns nicely with our background. So I'm very focused on, being out with the customers, our go-to-market, our marketing, our branding, our advertising, kind of how we're positioning SAP. A lot of people still think of SAP as who we were the first 40 years of our journey, not necessarily how much we've broadened out over the last, 10 years, kind of where we take in the strategy of the company. Those are big decisions we work on together. Christian, from an operational perspective, his COO background is really helpful because getting our company, we have 100,000 people now. We have a huge global company. And to be able to move fast and transform, you got to have things in place, and the company needs to operate in different ways. He also spends time in our customer base articulating what we're doing to disrupt ourselves and how we're using our own software. And so those backgrounds really help us divide and conquer very well.
Vas, you've talked in interviews about your own self-improvement practice, the books you read, the meditation you do. Talk a little bit about how you think about your own self-disruption. What are the things that you do to make sure that you're not getting complacent as a CEO and as an executive?
Yeah, I think first, I think that it's really important for CEOs, but leaders in general, to realize you're always a work in progress. The moment I think you've arrived as a leader, the moment you've kind of become delusional. So I think you have to be convinced you're a work in progress. And with that, there's many things I think people can do. All the research shows, whether it's nutrition, whether it's sleep, we should all be sleeping more if you want to lead and disrupt more.
Paging Arianna Huffington.
Yes, sleep, mindfulness, all of these things I think help leaders get a sense of balance, in a sense, work on their inner self so that they can lead better outwardly. And I think it matters a lot if you really want to disrupt. People often ask me, so we've done $70 billion of transactions in the last 2 years. We entered gene therapy, radioligand therapy, and RNA therapies, largely ahead of our peers. And a lot of it came down, I think, to a certain sense of self-confidence you build in yourself, where you're comfortable that your identity is not tied to being CEO. And if it all goes wrong, it all goes wrong. But you're going to do the right things for the company. And that gives you that sense that you can do something special and try to make those things happen. Now, specifically to your questions, there's two pieces of advice I'd have. People can say many different theories at the moment on mindfulness. But if you practice it, one of the most interesting things is look at the thoughts that come across your head and observe yourself. Because that's a great window into what's going on inside of you, and it helps you disrupt. I think that's one big opportunity. And I think second, I am always thirsty for more feedback. I'm like a 360 junkie. I want more 360s, because the only way you have a window into how you're leading is looking at all those things. Maybe the third, I'm a big reader of periodicals and books. I also got into podcasts, and I think the great thing about podcasts is you can be walking from meeting to meeting and listen to these podcasts with lots of crazy ideas, and some of them, then you write an email and something happens. So I think there's a lot you can do, but I think it starts with working on yourself as a work in progress.
Do you listen to them at normal speed, or do you listen to like the 3 times speed?
No, but I have a secret weapon. My wife curates my podcast for me. She's super good at it, and that helps a lot.
I want to ask all of the other panelists to talk a little bit about whom they turn to for help on disruption or ideas on disruption. But Vas, before we move on, you mentioned the $70 billion in transactions and the transformation journey that you're taking Novartis on. How do you bring your board of directors along for the ride? Because we talked a little bit about employees, but you got to get a very powerful group of people to sign off on this journey. You may have the confidence, but ultimately someone needs to sign off. What's that process like?
I can tell you, when I first showed up and said I want to unboss the company, there was a lot of confused looks in there.
The boss is saying we want to unboss.
He wants anarchy now. But I think it's been great. They've been incredibly supportive. I think, one, you just have to set a very ambitious vision. And I think when I set a vision that I want us to be the most valued medicines company in the world, and just doing the same things is not going to get us there. We need to do something different in a highly competitive industry. I think they went along. I think rightfully challenge a lot. But I think that because it all fits within an overall vision that we set out on day one and fits with that strategy, that worked. The other thing I'd say is go fast, because before people can figure out exactly what just keep going.
Jim, you joked a little bit about CEO training, but I'm curious to get a sense of whether or not there are external forces or folks that you turn to help you make sure that you're staying current or not getting complacent.
Yeah, there's some great organizations to kind of supplement one's perspective on this area. And I found G100, which is an organization that many of you are associated with, is always kind of staying au courant, with what's going on, what should you be thinking about, and so that's a good one. I stay very plugged into the high-end consulting firms because I have this obsession with the accelerating pace of technological change and how it's impacting society, individuals, the company, the governments, and how that kind of all kind of interacts, if you will, and creates this environment that we use the term VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so to cut through all that and try to figure out, what's our place in the world, where we have permission to play, what do we need to do radical, to continue to thrive as an organization, and what does the corporation and corporations in general need to do to have a license to operate on a continuing basis in the society, and also to preserve the democratic system. Obviously, one company, one CEO isn't going to impact that dramatically, but if you can get a force field movement going, which I think is starting to happen based on my observations with the Business Roundtable now here, and it's just it's time for that. But I find that the thinking that goes on in the high-end consulting firms in particular is so helpful, because we tend to, and I'm paranoid about the accelerating pace of technological change, so I'm really looking forward. I have the luxury of doing that because I'm not managing on a day-to-day operation every aspect of the company. I have other people to do that, so I'm able to look forward, and it's terrifying when you think about all the absorption that has to go on, the ability of society and our organization, our individuals, to absorb all this change. And so one has to take advantage of that. And that's how I kind of, I obviously read a lot and a lot of different things to help prepare for it. But I just stay fixated on how is the accelerating pace of technological change, how are we going to absorb that, not get disrupted, and stay a powerful force in the world.
Jennifer, who do you turn to?
First, I love your comments. I think that that's so true. The more you ascend in your career, what I've learned, whether you're ascending, up the chain, or whether you're just ascending in terms of whatever the role is that you're doing and taking on more, the more obsessed you have to become about learning and also taking care of yourself. I think that for years we've lived in this society where there's like this badge of honor of working 18 hours a day and, being on email forever and bragging about that. And you send a message that that's what success is. And as a leader, I've just found just like an athlete has to take care of their body and, get sleep and eat well, you have to do the same thing, not just for your body, but for your brain, which means giving it stillness, giving it time to build muscle. And so looking in different places and giving yourself the opportunity to do that is important. For me, I love the podcast too, because you can listen to them. I listen to it when I get ready in the morning, right? Because that's just a simple time. I'm focused. Nobody's bothering me. Reading is very important. And through that, I've identified different people who are just very different probably from the day-to-day of what I've done that I've engaged. Frances Frei, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. I love her because she's the kind of person who, when you bring her in, you, number one, cannot have any kind of ego, and title doesn't matter, because she will make you see yourself, the way you need to see yourself and what's great about who you are, what can become a better version of who you are, and just helps you focus on the things that are important and help you think about how you lead. Those are the kinds of people that I think are people who are very different from you, that you can just, it unlocks new ways of thinking. And then it's very helpful for me. Like, this is a therapy session for me to hear everybody up here talking, because it's true. I think as a leader, when you watch leaders, when you're coming up in your career and you watch leaders above you, you think they have it all figured out. They've got the answer key. And you get there and you realize there is no answer key. And you have to know what you don't know as a leader and make sure that you open yourself up with a sense of humility and curiosity to always find new things.
CVK, under your leadership at HCL, the company has undergone tremendous change. It's a very different company today than it was when you took over. What prompted your decisions to transform the company? Was it external? Was it internal? Talk a little bit about how you thought about undertaking the journey of disrupting the company.
If you look at HCL, we're a 44-year-old company. We've constantly reinvented what we were going after. So a lot of times, and even when I took over, it was more of an internal approach to disrupt our business. Because if you look at the traditional technology industry, while automation is so pervasive, if you're delivering something for X dollars, your clients expect you to do that at half X in a couple of years. So you need to, you can resist doing that, but you're doing it at your own disruption, right? So we were very happy to cannibalize our business. I think that was the fundamental philosophy. And so a lot of disruption happened because of the internal drive. And while we are a very good services company, we've invested in a lot in deepening our capabilities in AI and a lot of new technologies. We also said services is just one element. Can we do something totally different? And that's where 4 years back, we articulated what I call as the Mode 1, 2, 3 strategy. Mode 1 is really bringing your existing business, trying to kind of innovate and do incremental innovation in your existing business. And Mode 2 is using all the new technologies, which can really bring differentiated business outcomes, can help create differentiated business models. So there are new generation services. And Mode 3 is completely future focused, where you can use intellectual property rather than just looking at services. Can we look at products and platform as a new business stream? And we went very aggressively when we didn't have to do anything about it, right? We were doing very well, growing at 15, 20%. We said, this is not going to continue forever. Let's do something different, which can take us for the next 10 years. So the Mode 1, 2, 3 gives you a very good framework to strengthen your core, use new technologies to create a near-term growth opportunity. And Mode 3 is completely new business model and new areas. I think that strategy helped. And we kept the strategy simple. We relentlessly focused on execution. And we also created a differentiated business model. In our industry, we would be one of the very few who would bet on a business outcome and sign up a contract with the customer where we will tie ourselves to the business outcome. I think a differentiated business model, simple strategy, and relentless execution, I would say.
Right. Yeah, these days no one can be in a commodity business anymore. It's all about differentiation. Jim, I promised that I would come back to your worst case scenario comment because, as I said, so many of the disruptors that a magazine like Fast Company writes about, they're not looking in the rearview mirror. They're just looking ahead. They're plowing forward. So how do you introduce a little bit of that risk mentality, a little bit of that, like, let's think about the worst case scenario mentality without it dragging the organization down, without it becoming the thing that stands in the way of progress?
Well, I always tell people in risk management, oftentimes the risk of doing nothing is the biggest risk of all.
Yeah.
It's also an action.
And a lot of people don't, it's not intuitive to people. So if you kind of stress that and then say, let's consider different scenarios, and one of them will be the risk of doing nothing and business as usual, and then there's things that can happen to us and things that we can do. And if you understand that scenario analysis and then start thinking about probabilities of the different scenarios and consequences of the different scenarios, it's healthy. It's healthy to understand the range of outcomes on any particular topic, and then to really have thought through them. And you teach the organization how to do that, and then they start doing it themselves, and it spreads through the organization.
Vas, you.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think it's also important to have stories. I mean, I think people relate to stories of your history, and I think to remind people of some of the stories of where we did get disrupted. Our company's 250 years old. Plenty of times we got disrupted. And how do you keep reminding people of those stories? Because what I find is there's a kind of natural myopia in organizations where you kind of focus on the next 3 to 5 years. And it's easy for a CEO to just zoom in because of our quarterly pace to think of just about that. But how do you find the time to look at the technologies 5, 10 years plus, and then push the organization to say, this could happen, and if we don't start now, we will be disrupted in 7 years. But it's not a natural thing. I mean, I think especially with the quarterly earnings push, it's just everything just brings you back to like the next 6 months, and it's an active effort to kind of to really pull back.
Jennifer, how are you guys thinking at SAP about this concept of, the risk of not doing things versus plunging in? And, again, talk a little bit about how you build a mentality inside an organization like SAP that is, risk forward.
I think what's super important in all of us are running big companies who have many years of history. And it's natural for any big company. The tendency is to be insular. The tendency is to kind of always go back to what you know and what's always worked. And so for me, I think one of the biggest things a CEO has to do, and leaders within an organization, is bring the outside in. Is to constantly bring that outside context of what's happening outside the four walls of this company so that we can understand the context in which we have to fit what we do most effectively within that external content. And so I agree, the stories, the experiences, and constantly just sharing that then creates, what hopefully is something that multiplies, right, across the organization, where people become more curious when they're bringing the outside in, when they're able to articulate not just what they're doing, but why are you doing this? Why are you focusing on this? And when you start to do that, people can't always answer that question. And they then kind of realize, all right, I've got to think differently. Because the best gift you can do, the CEO can't be the only person who's the visionary in chief. Not in big companies anymore. You need leaders and you need people who are going to bring those ideas and infuse that into the culture of the organization.
CVK, what's the one tech trend or a handful of tech trends that any CEO who is undergoing this disruption journey needs to be aware of? I know, Vas, you're doing a lot with artificial intelligence, for example, in partnership with Microsoft. But as you're talking to CEOs and they say, what do I need to know? What should be at the top of their list? What should they be absorbing?
It's honestly very difficult to call out one technology because technology is at the core of every disruption in every industry. But ubiquitous intelligence, AI, Internet of Things, the pervasive connectivity in a most simple form, I think that's really one of the most fundamental things which the CEOs need to understand. And that helps them create completely new business models. While understanding technology, having an appreciation of technology is important, but I think CEOs really need to think of not so much of technology, what differentiated business model or what different external forces can change the dynamics in your business. Once you kind of have a good understanding of that, then there are lots of technologies which plays into making that happen. So I think understanding of your industry and what's happening around you, your ecosystem partners, your customer behavior, if you can get a good sense of all that, then technology is there to help you. And there are lots of people who can help you on the technology front. That's what I would say.
One thing we haven't talked about yet is the role of the consumer. And I know a lot of you are in B2B companies. Jim, you actually do touch the consumer more directly through some of the products in your portfolio. I'll start with you. So much of disruption is being driven by consumer behaviors. And I know everyone here is indirectly, if not directly, touched by it. What are you seeing among consumers, and how is that driving the way you think about disruption?
I think in our industry, the biggest impact that we see is on the supply chain, because everything needs to happen instantaneously now. We used to have, a big manufacturing base in China. We actually still do, but we're gravitating that back to, where we sell now, because we need to be able to respond so quickly. And so smaller lot sizes, less time transportation, agile supply chain, being able to respond quickly. A lot of things have remained the same. They want quality, they want, the best value for the price, these types of things. They want innovation. They want to own the best tools they could possibly own. But the difference is they want it now. They want it, they used to want it, when it came, whenever, but now we want it now.
And are you seeing any differences in the buying patterns of the younger consumer? We hear a lot about how millennial and younger consumers, don't want to own homes. They don't want to own cars. They're not as drawn to some of the trends that their parents' generation were drawn to. Has that affected the appetite for your products?
I'd say what I have observed there is that they really want to associate themselves with purposeful brands. They don't want, just the same old brands that their parents and their grandparents bought necessarily, unless those brands have been transformed into purposeful brands.
Vas, on the same theme, those same younger consumers are also your younger employees. Yeah. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the role that this new generation is playing in the workforce. Are these younger, newer employees your partners in disruption, and how do you marshal that energy?
So yes, absolutely. Part of the reason we go with the unbossed philosophy is a belief that fundamentally in our industry, if you go back 100 years, we had primarily people working in factory-oriented roles. Now we have mostly knowledge workers. And we know, we love Daniel Pink at Novartis, but I think his research and others have all shown that in the end, knowledge workers are motivated by a sense of purpose, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of personal growth, mastery. And so if you can create that environment, then these younger people or millennials or whatever you want to call it, but also, I would also say older generations too, it turns out like the same culture, just don't articulate it as forcefully, you get a lot better ideas from the company. I think most of the best disruption happening at Novartis is happening from the ground up. I mean, and that's what I consistently observe. So if you can get people to believe you have that kind of environment, you can attract great millennials, and you can also inspire a whole workforce. We're 50% millennial, as Novartis. And so, and it grows every year. So if you don't create that environment, I also think people won't stay at your company. So I don't see it as an option anymore to create those kinds of environments.
Jennifer, for years in the technology world, the mantra was only the paranoid survive, the famous Andy Grove book. And that really did drive a lot of the way tech companies thought about innovation and growth. At SAP, big global company, how do you achieve that balance between inspiring people with that sense of, nagging paranoia versus what Vas just talked about, which is inspiring people?
You have to show them stories of other companies, other experiences that people have had. you were saying that you learned so much from your customers, and I think that that's very, very true. Is giving people the opportunity to have those experiences, to see what other companies have done, to see how they've done it. It used to be that we tended to look within the industry in which we worked for other examples of how did others do it? What are examples of that? Now, those walls have come down. Companies are moving into different industries. I mean, you look at a company like Mars, which was a candy company, and now they're in the pet business, right? If they had only focused on, okay, how do we need to disrupt ourselves based on what others in their original business were doing, they never would have thought differently about where they can go. And so when you give people the access and you encourage them to really understand what's going on, I'm going to go back to the outside and in context. I think that's where a lot of those ideas can come. And I agree with Vas, like that has to come from, you have to incite that within your organization, because some of the best ideas that I've seen have come from the places I would have least expected, with the people who have not a lot of experience because they have a beginner's mindset.
I think we have time for a couple of questions from the room. Does anybody, we have a mic right here in the front row. Give me 1 second. And if you could just identify yourself very quickly.
Yeah, hi, my name is Janine, and I think great panel discussion, wonderful insights across the spectrum. This year, the theme has been on sustainability. And one, I would like to get your thoughts as leaders within your organization. How do you see sustainability? And second, if I combine the theme, is sustainability going to be a disruptive force within your own businesses or across the spectrum?
We'll start with you, Vas, and then we'll go down.
Sure, yeah. Certainly, it's become, I think, a top priority for any globally operating company. The approach we've taken is to set very aggressive targets and then try to figure out how we're going to get there. So we said we want to be carbon neutral in our own operations by 2025, so scope 1 and 2, and then also get scope 3, which would be a pretty sizable third-party network by 2030, and also in the same time period be water neutral and waste neutral. Now, what was interesting about it is, coming back to the millennial question, just putting out those targets just energized the base of the organization. People got really excited. There actually is a ground-up network that formed across our hundreds of sites around the world to actually come up with ideas on how to make this happen faster. So actually, it was interesting. You kind of light a fuse, and then all of these candles start burning. So I'm optimistic. I think. The reality, what I believe, though, is somehow for our sector, we need to come together if we're really going to make this happen. Individual companies is great, but if you really want like an entire third-party supply chain network to become carbon zero or carbon neutral, it has to be an industry-wide effort.
And are you optimistic that your parties can come together to come up with a solution?
Not yet, but we'll work on it.
I'll check with you in a year. Jim?
So 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, when I took over the CEO job, I knew that we had to do something to elevate our commitment to innovation and sustainability. So I picked a vision. I said, we'll double the size of the company in 6 years, and we're going to focus on 3 themes. The first one is going to continue top quartile financial performance. The second one was to become known as one of the world's great innovative companies, and that's a pretty high bar. And the third one was to elevate our commitment to corporate social responsibility, which includes sustainability in my parlance. And I didn't know at the time the power of having those 3 themes work so synergistically. It really is so inspiring to especially to the younger generations, but I think to all generations, to know that you're having a positive impact on society, that you are capturing the imagination of 60,000 people with focus on innovation, and continuing to perform, at a high level financially, and they just all work beautifully together.
Maybe I'll take the question from a different perspective. As from a company, we've set our targets similar to how Vas described, but at the same time, beyond the awareness, because I think last year was really, creating this incredible awareness, and now we've got to get into the how. Right? And so one of the things we're excited about is thinking about how can we help our customers focus on those goals. And when you think about our heritage and what we've always done, financial accounting, supply chain, procurement, manufacturing, logistics, and travel, all of those processes are the processes that can drive improvements around sustainability, whether it be carbon, whether it be water, whether, whatever it might be. And so we're excited because we are actually, from a product perspective, looking at how, from a road mapping, we start with looking at how can you create a carbon ledger? As simple as that. Similar to financial, right? Because we track something on, on the financials and the accounting, but we've got to start to articulate where on the income statement, where on the balance sheet does it show up, number one, to create that awareness. But then number two, how can you start to infuse that across those business processes, source to pay, corporate travel? How do you give the tools and the processes to your people to be able to do it differently and then drive the financial and the environmental outcomes? So that's what we're up to.
Very good.
CVK?
Yeah, of course, we have sustainability goals and we relentlessly chase them. But the way we look at it in our businesses, we have 150,000 people, operate in over 50 countries. And the global talent supply chain is very globalized. So but I strongly believe that's really not a sustainable model. How much can you localize? How much can you really invest in the geographies and communities where we do business and kind of build the talent in those geographies to deliver to our clients? So that's been a big differentiating factor. In fact, in the US, close to 75% of our workforce are local. And we have the largest number of delivery centers in country, which is quite different from how our peers in the industry have looked at some of these things. So I think, how do you create a resilient and a sustainable business model? That itself is a big part of the sustainability.
I want to thank all of our panelists for these terrific comments today. We set out to do a conversation about disruption, but really ended up in a place where we talked about purpose and inspiration, and that's really what business is all about these days. So I'd like to thank Vas, Jim, Jennifer, and CVK for their time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.